The night was too quiet. Daniel Cross had spent enough years in war zones to know that silence was never peace. It was a warning. On the streets of Boston, that silence felt heavier than gunfire. He walked alone, his boots echoing against cracked pavement, the smell of stale rain rising from the asphalt. His beard was overgrown, his jacket frayed, and in his eyes lingered the kind of exhaustion that no sleep could cure. To the people passing by, he was just another drifter, another veteran who couldn't leave the war behind. They didn't know his name. They didn't know that once whispers of ghost soldier traveled through insurgent camps like a curse. But Daniel wasn't thinking about the past. He was just trying to forget it. That was when he saw the alley, a flicker of movement. A shadow too sharp against the wall. The kind of detail most people miss, but not him. Not after years of training where missing details got men killed. He slowed, watched, and then he heard it. A muffled cry. Short, desperate, silenced before it could echo. Daniel's pulse sharpened. He turned, stepping into the darkness. At first glance, it was nothing more than a narrow cut between two old brick buildings, choked with dumpsters and trash bags. But there, half hidden under a sheet of cardboard, was a body, a young woman, blood pooling beneath her head. She was breathing barely. Daniel dropped to one knee, instincts firing. He pressed 2 fingers to her neck. Weak pulse. No time. But then his eyes caught something else. A mark on her wrist, faded, deliberate, burned into the skin. Not random. Not a gang tattoo. A symbol he hadn't seen in years. His breath froze. It was the insignia of an off-the-books unit he had once crossed paths with in the Middle East, a group buried so deep in classified files that even whispers of it could get soldiers discharged or worse. Daniel looked around. The alley wasn't empty anymore. At the far end, a figure watched him, still, silent, face hidden beneath a hood, and then, without a word, the figure slipped back into the night. Daniel felt the pull in his chest, the same pull that had dragged him through deserts, jungles, and bombed-out cities. He should have walked away. This wasn't his war. Not anymore. But the symbol on that woman's wrist wasn't a coincidence. It was a message. A ghost from the past clawing its way into the present. Sirens wailed in the distance. Daniel knew the cops would come, but they wouldn't see what he saw. They'd log it as another street assault, another nameless victim. They wouldn't know that what he had stumbled on was no random crime. It was a thread. And if he pulled it, if he let himself follow where it led, it could unravel everything he had tried to bury. For the first time in years, Daniel felt the old fire return. The kind that made his blood race, his hands steady, his vision sharpen. He wasn't a drifter anymore. He wasn't a broken soldier. He was a hunter again, and the hunt had just begun. The town of Clearwater was the kind of place people drove through without stopping. One main street, 2 diners, and an old movie theater that hadn't lit up its marquee in years. It was quiet, unremarkable, exactly the kind of place where someone could disappear. Daniel Cross had chosen it for that reason. Once, his name had meant something in circles that didn't officially exist. Special forces, black ops, missions buried under redacted pages and sealed files. He had been the man they called when failure wasn't an option. But now his name meant nothing here. He was just the quiet guy who worked odd jobs, repairing fences, hauling lumber, fixing engines. The townsfolk thought he was just another drifter putting down shaky roots, and he let them believe it. Daniel lived in a cabin at the edge of the woods, far enough from the town's heart that no one came knocking unless they had to. Inside, the walls were bare except for a few faded photographs. A battered duffel sat at the foot of his bed, packed with gear he swore he'd never touch again. Every morning he told himself the same thing, that life is over. But the body doesn't forget. His senses were always on high alert, scanning exits, memorizing faces, listening for tones and voices. He could be sitting in the diner with a plate of eggs and bacon, and his mind would still be calculating how long it would take him to reach the back door if something went wrong. He hated himself for it, but after years of surviving ambushes and betrayals, the paranoia had become instinct. The townspeople didn't see that side of him. They only saw a quiet, broad-shouldered man with a scar along his jawline who nodded politely and kept to himself. Some whispered that he'd done time. Others figured he was just broken down by life. But nobody guessed the truth. that he'd spent more nights overseas than at home, carrying secrets that could never be told. At night, the silence pressed hardest. He would sit on his porch staring at the tree line, a bottle of whiskey at his side. Sometimes the wind carried sounds that weren't there. Gunfire, radios crackling, the panicked shouts of men in the dark. His body would tense, muscles coiled like a spring, before he reminded himself, "You're not there anymore. You're here. It's over, except peace was never real. It was just an illusion, fragile and temporary." On one particular night, after a long day of repairing a farmer's fence, Daniel walked back through town. Fog rolled low across the streets, muffling the glow of the street lamps. He liked the emptiness, the way the world seemed to sleep. He passed the diner, now dark, and the gas station where the clerk always nodded at him but never asked his name. For a moment, it felt almost normal. Then he heard it, a sound that didn't belong. It was faint, so faint most people would have missed it. A cry, muffled, strained, carried on the night air. His steps froze, every nerve in his body sharpening to a knife's edge. He turned his head slowly, pinpointing the source. It came from the direction of the old mill, long abandoned, its windows broken and walls tagged with graffiti. No one went there anymore. Kids told ghost stories about it. Adults avoided it. Daniel's gut clenched. He told himself to keep walking. It wasn't his problem. Not anymore. But his training screamed louder than his conscience. Someone was in trouble. And men like him didn't ignore trouble, no matter how much they wanted to. With a quiet curse, Daniel adjusted the strap of his bag and started toward the mill, each step pulling him back into a world he thought he'd left behind. The operative in hiding was about to be dragged into a mystery that would shatter the fragile peace he'd built. The closer Daniel drew to the mill, the more the night seemed to hold its breath. The building loomed like a corpse of industry, rusted metal siding peeling away, windows shattered into jagged teeth. The faded company name, Clearwater Textile, clung in ghostly letters to the upper wall. Most people avoided this place. Daniel could see why. The air smelled of mildew and iron, damp and unsettling. The cry he'd heard earlier was gone now, swallowed by silence. He paused at the edge of the lot, crouching low. His eyes swept the ground, picking up details others would miss. Tire tracks that hadn't been there when he last passed this way. Fresh boot prints pressed into the mud, a cigarette butt still smoldering. Someone had been here, recently. He flexed his hands. Instinct told him this wasn't random. Moving like a shadow, Daniel slipped inside through a gap in the chain-link fence. The interior of the mill was colder, the air thick with dust. Moonlight spilled through the broken windows in streaks, casting long, skeletal shadows across the floor. Every sound, the creak of his boots, the drip of water, echoed unnaturally loud. He moved slowly, methodically, like he had 1,000 times before on missions where a single mistake meant death. His breathing slowed, his senses sharpened. He was no longer the man fixing fences and engines. He was the operative again. That's when he saw it. Near a collapsed support beam lay a scrap of fabric, torn and stiff with dried blood. His jaw tightened as he crouched to pick it up. This wasn't the kind of stain left by an old accident. It was fresh, days old at most. Beside it, half hidden under rubble, was an old metal box. Rust ate at its edges, but when he pried it open, the contents chilled him. Faded photographs, newspaper clippings, and police reports. He skimmed the first page. Local teen disappears 2009. Case closed, presumed runaway. Daniel frowned. The missing girl's face stared back at him, bright-eyed, smiling, frozen in time. He remembered seeing that flyer years ago, plastered on gas station doors and pinned to bulletin boards. The town had whispered, then gone quiet. He'd assumed the same as everyone else. She'd run away, maybe met a bad end elsewhere, but the blood-stained fabric in his hand told a different story. He flipped through the rest of the box. Each file was tied to a disappearance, different names, different years. All young women, all gone without answers. And every case marked the same way in red pen, closed. Daniel's chest tightened. This wasn't a coincidence. This was a cover-up. A faint noise snapped him out of his thoughts. A floorboard creaking, too deliberate to be the building settling. He shoved the box closed and pressed against the wall, listening. Someone else was here. A shadow moved at the far end of the mill, slow and careful. Whoever it was, they knew how to stalk in silence. Not a random trespasser. Someone watching. Daniel's hand itched toward the pocket knife clipped inside his jacket. He stayed still, heart steady, eyes locked on the shifting silhouette. The figure lingered for a moment, then retreated into the darkness. A door creaked faintly, then shut. Silence swallowed the mill again. Daniel waited another full minute before moving. Whoever it was, they hadn't wanted a confrontation, not yet. They wanted him to know he wasn't alone. A warning. He returned to the box, sliding a few key documents into his jacket. The rest he left untouched. Carrying the whole thing would draw attention. But this was enough proof to start pulling threads. As he stepped back into the night air, the weight of what he'd found pressed heavy on his chest. This wasn't just about a cry in the dark. This was about a town hiding skeletons, literally and figuratively. And he had just stumbled into the middle of it. Daniel glanced once more at the mill, its jagged windows glinting like watchful eyes. He whispered under his breath, "What the hell did I just walk into?" The operative who had sworn to bury his past was now holding the key to a crime long forgotten, but not forgiven. 3. The investigation, 800 words. Sleep didn't come that night. Daniel sat at his kitchen table, the dim light of a single lamp casting shadows across the documents he had taken from the mill. His scarred hands moved slowly as he spread them out. Police reports, witness statements, photographs. Every page told the same story. Young women gone missing, families desperate for answers, and a police department that closed the cases with convenient excuses. He read one aloud. Voice low, almost a growl. Case dismissed. No signs of foul play. Presumed runaway. His jaw tightened. He'd seen lazy reporting before, but this was different. The language was identical across multiple cases, word for word, as if copied and pasted. That wasn't oversight. That was deliberate. Daniel leaned back, rubbing his eyes. Why would the town bury this? The sound of gravel crunching outside pulled him from his thoughts. He killed the lamp instantly, plunging the cabin into darkness. His hand went to the old pistol locked in the drawer beside him. He hadn't touched it in years, but the feel of the cold metal was like shaking hands with an old friend. He peered through the window. A black sedan idled at the end of his drive, headlights off. 2 figures sat inside, watching. Daniel's pulse slowed. Whoever they were, they knew he'd found the files. And they weren't here to talk. He stayed still until the car eventually backed out and rolled down the road. They were testing him, measuring his response, which meant they'd be back. The next morning, Daniel went into town. He needed information, but more importantly, he needed to see who would try to stop him. At the diner, he slid into a booth, ordered black coffee, and unfolded one of the clippings. The missing girl's photo stared up at him. The waitress, an older woman with kind eyes, paused when she saw it. "You looking into that?" she asked quietly, glancing around to make sure no one else heard. Daniel studied her face. "You know her?" "Everyone knew her. Sweet girl. Vanished in 2009. The waitress lowered her voice further. "Her mother still sets a candle in the window every night. But the sheriff told her to let it go." Daniel frowned. "Why?" The waitress hesitated, then leaned in. "Because around here, asking questions gets you in trouble." Her words confirmed what he already suspected. Fear had silenced the town. Fear, or something worse. Later, Daniel stopped at the library, digging through old newspapers. The pattern became clearer. Every disappearance coincided with times when the sheriff's office was under scrutiny. Budget cuts, scandals, elections. The reports were conveniently timed to be buried under other headlines, but the files from the mill told a different story. Some victims had been last seen near the same places: the mill, the river road, an abandoned quarry. Remote areas where evidence could vanish. Daniel left the library with a folder full of photocopies, his mind racing. Someone had orchestrated this for years. And if the sheriff was involved, or at least complicit, then the rot went deeper than he thought. That night, as he walked back to his cabin, the weight of eyes followed him. A figure lingered across the street, then disappeared when Daniel turned his head. The message was clear: stop digging. Instead of retreating, Daniel pushed harder. He began canvassing the edges of town, talking to people who had nothing left to lose. Old drunks at the bar, families of the missing, a retired deputy who couldn't sleep at night. Piece by piece, the puzzle sharpened. The missing women weren't runaways. They were victims. And the town hadn't just failed them, it had hidden them. The retired deputy's words stayed with him. I wanted to investigate, I did. But orders came down to shut it fast. Said it came from higher up. Said if I valued my pension, I'd keep my mouth shut, so I did. And I've hated myself ever since. By the end of the week, Daniel's quiet life was gone. He was being watched constantly. The sedan reappeared. The same faces followed him in town. His phone, though he never gave out the number, buzzed once with a message. Walk away. But Daniel Cross had never been the kind of man to walk away. If anything, their threats only hardened his resolve. Whoever buried the truth thought they could scare him. They'd forgotten that fear was something he'd left on foreign soil years ago. And so, late one night, Daniel packed his duffel. The pistol, the knife, the surveillance gear he'd sworn off, all of it came out of storage. The operative was back, and he was going to uncover the truth, no matter who tried to stop him. Word count, 8112. Do you want me to keep going with part 4, the confrontation, 1,000 words, where Daniel uncovers the corruption and faces his first direct ambush? You said next. ChatGPT said perfect. Let's move into part 4, the confrontation, 1,000 words. Part 4, the confrontation, 1,000 words. The storm broke on a Friday night. Daniel had spent days connecting dots, piecing together timelines and chasing whispers that led him deeper into the shadows of the town. The picture was grim: missing women, silenced deputies, and a sheriff who seemed more interested in shutting doors than opening them. But there was one lead that kept pulling at him: the old quarry on the outskirts of town. Locals avoided it. Some called it cursed. Others claimed it had been fenced off because of unstable rock. Daniel knew better. A place that remote and forgotten made the perfect dumping ground. So he went, long after dark. The sky was bruised with clouds, the moon hidden, rain threatening to fall. He parked half a mile away and went the rest on foot, moving like he used to, silent, calculated, every sense tuned. The quarry loomed ahead, a jagged scar in the earth. Faded warning signs rattled in the wind. Daniel slipped through a gap in the fence and descended into the pit. His flashlight cut through the dark, beam steady. That's when he saw it. Fresh tire tracks. His chest tightened. Someone had been here recently. Then came the noise, the crunch of boots on gravel above him. He killed the light instantly, heart slowing, mind sharpening. Voices followed. Low, gruff, deliberate. Should have burned the rest of the files. Doesn't matter. He won't get far. We've got eyes everywhere. Daniel crouched low, watching shadows move across the lip of the quarry. 3 men, armed. They weren't hunters. They were lookouts, and they were looking for him. He waited until one descended halfway down the slope, flashlight sweeping the rocks. As the beam neared, Daniel struck. A hand clamped around the man's wrist, twisting hard. The flashlight fell, beam spinning wildly as Daniel dragged him into the dark. 2 sharp strikes later, the man slumped unconscious, weapon in Daniel's grip. Hey, you see him? One of the others called. Daniel stayed low, moving fast. Years of training took over. He wasn't fighting for medals or orders anymore. This was survival. A second man appeared at the base of the quarry, weapon raised. Daniel stepped from behind a boulder, striking like a phantom. The rifle clattered to the ground, followed by the sickening thud of a body hitting gravel. The third man panicked, firing blindly into the shadows. The quarry echoed with the sound of gunfire. Daniel ducked behind cover, heart steady, counting the rhythm of shots. When the man paused to reload, Daniel was on him, closing the distance, wrenching the rifle away and slamming the butt into his chest. The man gasped, then fell, groaning, 3 down, but Daniel knew better. They weren't alone. Headlights flared at the rim of the quarry. A vehicle. More men, Daniel swore under his breath. Whoever was orchestrating this had sent backup. The SUV screeched to a halt, doors flying open. 4 figures poured out, rifles ready. Their leader barked an order: find him, dead or alive. Daniel pressed against the rock wall, weighing his options. He could slip out in the dark, vanish into the trees, live to fight another day. But then he thought of the missing women, of the waitress whispering warnings, of the retired deputy haunted by guilt. He couldn't run. Not now. Daniel moved deeper into the quarry, using the terrain to his advantage. Rain began to fall, turning the gravel slick, masking his footsteps. The new arrivals spread out in pairs, sweeping the pit. He struck fast. Silent takedowns, chokeholds, a knife drawn only when necessary. Every motion was efficient, lethal, honed by years of black ops. By the time the leader realized half his men were gone, panic set in. "Fall back!" he shouted, but retreat came too late. Daniel stepped into the open, rifle leveled, eyes burning. "Drop it." The leader froze, weapon halfway raised. Rain plastered his hair to his face, but his eyes were defiant. "You don't know what you're messing with, Cross." Daniel's grip tightened. "Then why don't you tell me?" The man sneered. "You think this town's dirty? You've got no idea. The sheriff's just a pawn. This goes higher. Much higher." Before Daniel could press further, the man lunged, not for Daniel, but for a detonator clipped to his vest. Daniel fired. The leader dropped, the device clattering harmlessly to the ground. Silence. Only the rain remained, washing blood and dust into the earth. Daniel stood there, chest heaving, the weight of what he'd just heard sinking in. This wasn't about a small-town sheriff covering tracks. This was bigger, organized, controlled, and now they knew Daniel Cross was coming for them. He gathered what evidence he could, maps, weapons, scraps of communication from the SUV, then disappeared into the night before sirens could arrive. The battle wasn't over. It had only just begun. Daniel didn't sleep that night. He drove miles from the quarry, parked beneath the cover of pines, and spread out what he had taken on the hood of his truck. Rain pattered on the metal as he laid out weapons, scraps of paper, and the blood-smeared map he had pulled from the SUV. His hands worked with military precision. But his mind raced. The quarry had confirmed his suspicions. This wasn't just a forgotten crime, it was part of something bigger. A machine. An operation that reached into law enforcement, the courts, maybe higher. The men weren't thugs. They were trained. And their leader's last words echoed in his ears. "This goes higher. Much higher." The map showed routes, back roads, forest trails, and 3 circled sites outside of town. One was the quarry. The second, an abandoned cannery by the docks. The third, a warehouse listed as storage. But Daniel knew what storage meant in their language. Prison. He packed everything into a waterproof bag and started the engine. He couldn't afford hesitation. Every second wasted meant another woman, or man, was at risk. By dawn, Daniel was at the retired deputy's farmhouse. The old man answered the door with wary eyes, shotgun in hand, but lowered it when he saw who stood there. "You look like hell," the deputy muttered. "Letting him in. I found them," Daniel said, spreading the map across the kitchen table. The quarry was just one site. There are more. They're moving people. The deputy's hands trembled as he traced the circles. "I knew it. God help me, I knew it. Back then, I tried to push, to ask questions. Sheriff warned me to drop it or I'd end up like the others. So I did. I drank, I quit. But this," he jabbed a finger at the warehouse. "That's where they keep them before they disappear for good." Daniel locked eyes with him. "Then that's where I go next." The old man shook his head. "Not alone. If you walk in there by yourself, you won't walk out. I'll make a call." 2 hours later, Daniel found himself in the back of a quiet diner. Across from him sat the waitress who had slipped him the warning days before. Up close, her face was lined with exhaustion, but her eyes were sharp. "You're still alive," she said softly, sliding him a cup of coffee. "That means you found something." Daniel nodded. "The quarry. And more." She glanced around, then leaned in. "You don't understand how deep this runs. Judges, businessmen, they call it the circle. Everything's tied, money, drugs, trafficking. The sheriff's just a piece on the board. Take him out, someone else replaces him. You can't fight it head-on." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Then I cut the board in half." She studied him for a long moment, then slid a folded envelope across the table. "Inside is a name. He used to be one of them, until he tried to pull out. If anyone can help you tear this down, it's him. But be careful. They're watching everyone connected." Daniel tucked the envelope into his jacket. "Why help me?" Her voice cracked. "Because one of those missing girls is my sister." That night, Daniel moved. He scouted the warehouse first, watching from the tree line. Trucks came and went under the cover of darkness, headlights killed a block away. Guards circled with rifles slung. Inside, Daniel could see dim lights flicker, shadows moving behind barred windows. It was a holding site. His fists clenched. The men weren't just missing, they were alive, being moved like cattle. He waited until the guard rotation thinned. Rain began again, masking his footsteps as he crept closer, knife in hand. A silent strike, one man down. Another dragged into the dark. He scaled the side, slipping through a broken vent. Inside, the stench hit him. Sweat, blood, fear. Rows of cages lined the floor, women and men huddled inside, eyes wide with terror when they saw him. "Quiet," Daniel whispered, crouching by the nearest cage. "I'm getting you out." Keys dangled from a guard's belt. Daniel took them after a brief, brutal scuffle, then began unlocking doors. Panic spread, but he hushed them. "Stay low. Follow me." The last lock clicked open just as headlights flared outside. "The trucks were back. Move!" Daniel ordered, leading the captives toward a side exit. But the moment the first stepped outside, floodlights snapped on. Voices barked. Weapons cocked, a dozen armed men stood waiting. Daniel shoved the captives behind him, rifle raised. He recognized the sheriff among the figures, smug even in the rain. "Well, well," the sheriff drawled. "Cross. I wondered when you'd crawl out of whatever hole you were hiding in." "You're done," Daniel snapped. "I've got witnesses, evidence, enough to burn your whole circle down." The sheriff laughed. "You think anyone cares? Judges, politicians, CEOs, we own them. You walk out of here with these people, you're signing their death warrants. And yours." Daniel's finger hovered over the trigger, mind racing. He couldn't outgun them all. But he didn't have to. Behind the sheriff, engines roared. Headlights cut through the rain from the opposite side of the lot. Trucks, but not theirs, the deputy. He had brought backup. Gunfire erupted. Chaos exploded. Daniel shoved the freed captives into the woods, covering their retreat while bullets tore through the night. The warehouse became a battlefield. Shouts, screams, men falling into the mud. Daniel fought like a man possessed. Every strike was precise, every shot counted. He wasn't just fighting for survival, he was fighting for the souls caged inside. By the time the gunfire faded, the sheriff was gone, slipped into the shadows. But the captives were safe. The warehouse was theirs. And Daniel had proof now. Undeniable proof. Dawn broke over the carnage. The deputy leaned against a truck, bleeding but alive. The rescued huddled under blankets, weeping, holding one another. Daniel stood apart, staring at the rising sun. He knew this wasn't the end. The sheriff's words still burned in his mind. This goes higher. Much higher. He had won a battle, yes. But the war was only beginning. For every captive freed, there were more still trapped. For every sheriff exposed, there was someone richer, more powerful, waiting to take his place. But Daniel Cross had made his choice. He wasn't walking away, not until the circle was broken. Daniel Cross had fought battles in jungles, deserts, and war-torn cities, but nothing compared to the silence that hung over the warehouse once the gunfire ended. The rescued huddled together, too afraid to believe they were truly safe. The deputy leaned heavily on his shotgun, his breathing ragged. But his eyes locked on Daniel with something new. Respect. "You've stirred the hornet's nest," the deputy rasped. Daniel nodded, wiping rain and sweat from his face. "Good. That means they'll come out into the open." But even as he said it, he knew the danger was far from over. The sheriff had slipped away. And the circle, the network behind all of this, wouldn't sit idle while their operation burned. They would fight back, and they had more resources than Daniel could imagine. The challenge was clear. Expose the truth before the circle silenced him. The survivors gave statements, their voices trembling as they described being abducted, transported, and locked away like cargo. Daniel recorded everything on a body cam he had worn during the raid. He collected files, shipping manifests, and ledgers left behind in the warehouse, documents that tied names, payments, and movements to something much larger than small-town corruption.
It was enough to blow the doors wide open. But evidence meant nothing without exposure. If he handed it over to local law enforcement, it would vanish. If he brought it to state police, there was no guarantee it wouldn't land in the hands of someone already bought off. Daniel needed reach. He needed voices too loud to be silenced. The waitress's envelope still burned in his jacket. He opened it under the dawn light. Inside was a single name and number, Thomas Hale, a former federal investigator turned whistleblower, reportedly vanished after he tried to uncover trafficking routes linked to corporate contractors. If anyone could help bring this case into the light, It was him. Daniel arranged a meeting 2 towns over, in the back room of a shuttered library. He didn't travel alone. The deputy insisted on coming, shotgun across his knees, even as he limped from his wounds. Hale arrived late, gaunt, sharp-eyed, and constantly scanning the room. He looked like a man hunted for years. "You're either desperate or stupid, Cross," Hale said without preamble. "Reaching out to me puts a target on your back the size of Texas." Daniel slid the files across the table. "I raided their warehouse, freed their captives. I've got everything. Names, routes, payments. You want your shot at the circle? This is it." Hale's expression hardened as he flipped through the evidence. "Damn, you don't know what you've got here. These aren't just small-town players. These names tie into contractors with government contracts, logistics firms, security agencies, you name it. The circle runs its operations under the cover of official business. That's why no one can touch them." Daniel leaned forward. "So we hit them where it hurts. Exposure. We go public." Hale hesitated. "You don't just go public with this. Journalists vanish. Files get scrubbed. I barely made it out alive the last time I tried. If we're doing this, we need to move fast and wide. Drop everything at once. A storm they can't contain." The deputy finally spoke. "Then what are we waiting for?" That night, as Daniel, Hale, and the deputy prepared encrypted copies of the files, the circle made its first move. A convoy of black SUVs rolled into town, men in suits with federal badges. Real or fake, Daniel couldn't tell. They knocked on doors, asking about a dangerous fugitive, matching Daniel's description. Some locals, intimidated or bought, pointed them toward the old farmhouse. Daniel barely had time to react. One moment he was uploading files. The next the deputy's windows shattered under gunfire. "Move!" Daniel barked, grabbing Hale and dragging him toward the cellar. They slipped through a hidden exit, just as the SUVs encircled the house. Fire consumed the farmhouse minutes later. The deputy's life reduced to ashes. From the tree line, the deputy watched his home burn, jaw tight but silent. "They'll keep coming," Hale said grimly. "Then we don't give them the chance," Daniel replied. "We finish this." They relocated to an abandoned radio station Hale had once used as a safe house. With generators humming and old transmitters patched into modern networks, they prepared their strike. Hale worked furiously, splicing together Daniel's footage from the raid, survivor testimonies, and the incriminating files. Daniel and the deputy secured the perimeter, expecting company at any moment. Finally, Hale hit a key. Screens lit up across multiple platforms. Encrypted leaks sent to trusted journalists, whistleblower networks, even anonymous forums. The footage went live. The cages, the captives, the firefight. The sheriff's face caught in the glare of floodlights. Unmistakable. Within minutes, the story spread like wildfire. Phones buzzed with alerts. News anchors scrambled. Social media erupted. And for the first time, the circle was on the defensive. But they weren't beaten yet. Within an hour, helicopters thundered overhead. SUVs rolled down the dirt road toward the station. A full tactical team, armed to the teeth, moving with military precision. "They're coming for us," the deputy growled. Daniel checked his rifle, eyes cold. "Then we make it cost them." The firefight that followed was brutal. Bullets ripped through walls. The old station shook under explosions. Daniel and the deputy fought side by side, taking down wave after wave. Hale kept the broadcast running, refusing to abandon the signal. Even as shrapnel tore into his arm, the circle wanted silence. Instead, they got noise. Gunfire echoing over live audio streams Hale had patched into the feed. The world didn't just see the files. They heard the battle as it unfolded in real time. Daniel knew they couldn't hold forever, but they didn't need forever. They just needed time. Sirens wailed in the distance. Not circle men, but state troopers. and federal agents responding to the chaos. Too many eyes were on the situation now. Too many journalists were broadcasting it live. The SUVs peeled away, retreating before real accountability arrived. The helicopters vanished into the clouds. The circle had been forced to back down. The radio station was a ruin, walls riddled with bullet holes. But the signal had gone out. The truth was loose, and it wasn't coming back. By morning, the story dominated headlines. National news replayed Daniel's footage. Survivors were interviewed on prime time. Lawmakers demanded investigations. The sheriff was declared a fugitive, his face plastered across every screen. But Daniel didn't celebrate. He stood outside the burned remains of the farmhouse with the deputy, both of them silent. Hale joined them, arm bandaged, eyes weary. "We lit the fire," Hale said. "But don't fool yourself. The circle will regroup. They'll bury evidence, pay off senators, spin the story until half the country doubts it ever happened. That's what they do." Daniel stared into the horizon. "Then we don't stop. We keep pulling the threads until the whole circle unravels." The deputy gripped his shoulder. "You've started a war cross. You better be ready to finish it." Daniel nodded once. He had made his choice the night he stepped into the quarry. This wasn't just about one town, one sheriff, or one crime. This was about a machine built on silence and fear, and Daniel Cross had just shown the world how to fight it.